Welcome back for another episode of Cyber Conversations. I've got a very exciting one today, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dan Nguyen-Huu. Dan is General Partner at Decibel Partners. And if you haven't come across Decibel before, they're an early stage specialist fund focusing on technical founders building technical products in technical domains. They really have a focus on infrastructure IT, IE engineering, and cybersecurity, where they're primarily investing in pre seed, seed, and Series A vendors. So you can really see why we're talking today, because I think very relevant to, of course, the market that we're working in. But Dan, before we dive into some of the things that we're going to unpack, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here with me. Why don't you maybe introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about who you are?
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I'm a general partner here at Decibel. We are focused on early stage investing, working with the most elite technical founders we can find and helping them find product market fit as fast as humanly possible. I've spent the last 12 years on the venture capital side. Started my career at a small cloud computing company called VMware, but then eventually I started moving into investing. After that, I invested in companies like Databricks and Sumo Logic, Matillion ETL, all the way down to seeding companies like Expel and Sublime Security. And we have worked with a lot of really fantastic cybersecurity companies in particular over the last few years, including Census and Run Zero and SpectreOps. We've been really, really excited about working with these companies over the last few years as we have built the firm.
And you just casually name drop some very exciting vendors in the industry there as well, because I think that just demonstrates the eye that you guys have for a really good quality product out there. And it's a really exciting industry. There's loads going on. And we're recently off the back of RSA, which is really going to set the tone for today's conversation. But there's one thing I really want to make sure that we dive into, because anybody that went to the conference will have seen the awesome marketing that you guys did, but obviously all around the fan festival that you put on at RSA. We've obviously see a lot of VCs in the industry that will host events. Maybe they do a day thing, but you guys obviously hosted a multi-day kind of festival, a space away from the main floor, but also very close. You're just a couple of steps away from the Moscone. Phenomenal idea, but I would love to know what's the inspiration behind it? What's been the real driver for making or creating that space within the conference?
Yeah, I think that we are early stage focused and we are always been our passion is to really bring founders together, is to bring operators together and to bring customers together and show them kind of the latest and greatest or the newest stuff that is coming out of the industry. And we always want to bring like real experts into these conversations and a place for the community to really be together and learn. Moscone and RSA in general is a wonderful conference, but of course it is a massive conference and easy to get lost a little bit in on the big show floor and with all the vendors that are going around. So we're really trying to maybe bring the early stage community together in one place. What we basically did this year, which is a 3-day festival, having over 1,000 people come through the Oasis, having a lot of really interesting lightning talks with folks like Clint Gibler from TLDRSec or Dan Miesler from Unsupervised Learning, all the way to Pat Opet, the CC of JP Morgan, or Bipul Sinha, who is the founder of Rubrik, sharing his thoughts on how to actually build a phenomenal company over the last few years. So I think we try to bring together a group of really special people alongside people who really care about early stage product building and seeing kind of the latest and greatest. And that's really what we try to do this year.
No, and you, especially as somebody who had the privilege of attending a couple of the events as well, but also just hearing word on the grapevine, it was very successful. But also, what was really unique about what you did is it was quite varied in terms of, you mentioned lightning talks, but then you would host all sorts of different events, some of them more networking specific, more fireside chats. I think kind of creating it wasn't the same thing all day long. It wasn't just people coming in and just having a conversation. There was all sorts of different verticals that you were leaning into as well. Obviously, conversations around some of the key trending topics, but I also think you were having conversations about things that maybe weren't the big topic of the week, but are really interesting things to address. What do you think if we look at the impact of that or just creating that space? What does that look like from your portfolio companies, from you guys on that side? Because I think it's an incredible idea, and it'd be really good to maybe just dive a little bit deeper into how that variety was built and so on.
Yeah, I think what's really real about the cybersecurity industry is, of course, that there's a lot of marketing dollars flowing into it. It's obviously a very valuable industry overall. And if you're an early stage company, if you're just starting out, you might not have a huge booth yet. You might not have all the capabilities yet to really make noise. And so this is why we created Oasis in the first place. It was meant to be a place where people could come and see something that is different or unique or early so they could really see where the future is going. So from a founder perspective, to address your question, we wanted to make sure that founders had a chance to present their own new ideas. This year we had companies like Sandera and Mallory and Nebula show off some of these new capabilities that they've built over the last 6 to 9 months and really show the world what this looks like. To give you a really good example of our company that's gone through this from the early iteration, a few years ago when LMs first came out, we launched the first AI SOC company at the founder Oasis. A founder called named Edward Wu, who built Dropzone, had done incredibly well on that stage and showed the world for the first time that you could use LLMs to conduct a full scale investigate and alert. And that hadn't really been done before that. Now, of course, AI SOC is a category that is well understood. And I would say that the use case is becoming more mature in the industry itself. But a few years ago, that was like not obvious. Of course, along the way, the models have gotten better, AI has gotten better. But I think if you really want to see the latest and greatest on the bleeding edge, hopefully you'll find your way into the Founder Oasis one day.
No, for sure. And I think I can genuinely say, and I think also love the term Oasis. Also love the marketing behind. If anybody saw the posters and everything you put together, it was really giving music festival, and it was a great energy, just an overall great kind of breath of fresh air. I think is a really nice way to also describe it from the very busy conference floor. And so let's dive a little bit more into the depth of RSA then, because obviously you had the Oasis, you had this great environment where you're able to get some of the early stage founders within your portfolio to really have the opportunity to showcase while not getting flooded on the conference floor. And let's put it quite simply, the absolute extortion some of those booths are on the conference floor for how crazy it is down there. But what else came out of the conference for you guys? Because we all know as well, it's a prime time to look at what technologies are really going to see some transformation in the space. Where are we really going to see the investment fall? And naturally, that often comes down for people such as yourselves who are going out there and exploring what's on the floor. So I'd be really interested to move on and get your thoughts from what did we see or did you see more specifically at RSA that was really exciting, or some conversations that you thought, hey, okay, I can see that this is where the space is really going to start to move.
Yeah, I think if you go back in time and looked at RSA or maybe even Black Hat last year, you could really tell that AI had really taken a hold of people, but it was largely conversational. It was largely a concept that people were exploring, were interested in talking about. I think this year it was very obvious that people started talking more about agents and harnesses and things like that, actually in deployment of enterprise environments. And the more these type of AI applications are being built inside the enterprise, that really causes, I would say, the entire attack surface of the enterprise to change, which then, of course, cause all of the tooling around it requiring a change as well. And I think that's maybe the biggest iteration that we've seen is in the first iteration of LMs and AI, it was really around labor arbitrage, right? So
Yeah.
what can we do with AI that can help humans be better at their jobs or maybe take some of these like low end tasks off your desk altogether? But in the context of the environment of the enterprise changing, that has created a whole new attack surface. That's maybe the first thing. The second big trend that I really observed is that the sentiment around what LMs can do in actual exploit or attack work is also being more and more recognized, right?
Yeah.
I first saw this really through our investment in Sublime Security, which is an email security platform where phishing really exploded, right? Not just in scale, but also in terms of the customization of the actual attack, right? And no longer are those phishing emails really obvious to spot. They're actually getting incredibly good. And seeing Sublime really do well in that category because the attack vectors had changed was one thing that was really interesting in that regard. I think now in this next iteration, of course, Mythos maybe came after RSA per se, but I think that the point stands that both from the adversary side as well as the frontier model side, AI is obviously being used on how attacks are being carried out, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to research targets. It's easier to generate convincing lures. It's easier to adapt once access is gained. right? So the result of that is really that the attacks are getting faster and they're more persistent. And so this is why I think the world is really changing quite rapidly. So on the macro side, those are really the big things that we're seeing. And so if you take those aspects of a changing attack surface and also a changing attack method, when you play this kind of forward a couple years from now, what is very clear is that the human resource constraint that an adversary would have is really just now constrained by tokens.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, and we know that the token cost is deflationary over time, it's very clear to me that most of the cybersecurity market would likely require a refresh on the way we're thinking about it.
Yeah, which I think is a really good point to make, and it that goes back to quite a few conversations that I've had where it's also been a case that the thing here with a cyber vendor right now, and arguably with most SaaS companies, but specifically in cyber, there's no opportunity to stagnate. As in, you can't create a product and go, "Yes, we've created this product. It's awesome. Let's get it out to market." And then leave the product as is because the evolution is so significant, but it's also so rapid within the industry. And like you mentioned, if we're looking at the adversaries, how quickly their technology is being developed. And I've mentioned several times that obviously they don't have the parameters to work within from a ethical perspective, I think is probably a fair way to say. Obviously, the way that they can R&D in comparison to us is also drastically different, which means then that I think a lot of companies that haven't been able to continue and stay as modernized as possible, it's quite easy to become obsolete in this industry, especially with the amount of new startups that come into play. And there's a couple of interesting things that we see. We see a lot of acquisitions happening. Of course, that's definitely a trend that we're seeing a lot more of, but we are seeing a lot more collaboration cross vendors and those partnerships because people are really wanting more of a holistic platform these days rather than I want to have 50 partners that I'm using from these perspectives because then that falls into the third party risk management and all these different complications that then come with that, ignoring the cost and so on. And the point I'm trying to get at in a very long-winded kind of way here is obviously, I suppose, with what you've mentioned there, there's also the fact that what we predict or what we're seeing right now is going to continually change because you were right, what you said earlier. This time last year at RSA, it was the fact that everybody was talking about AI like it was this phenomenal, exciting technology. And this year it was agentic because AI has become so advanced in the space of 12 months that we're now using it as an agent that can think for itself. I think that the common kind of theme here is the fact that the integration of AI is the word that I'm looking for here is now the bog standard. If you've got a startup, it would be assumed that you're adopting and leveraging that as a technology. What I want to dive into really is if we're looking at from those notes, what is your general prediction this year of where we're going to see, even if it comes by the time we're getting to like black hat, because we already see quite a big transformation there. Is there anything in particular that you're expecting is really going to be a main vertical where we're seeing startups come out of? Is there anything that you've maybe specifically got your eye on where you're like, I see this as a gap and I don't see anybody solving it right now?
There's plenty of categories. I have traditionally always been a very thematic investor, so I like to start at the macro level, which is why you hear me talk about some of the macro trends that you were seeing in the market space. I think the largest kind of tagline that I can give you is in a way, like AI is maybe calling BS on all the known but exploitable vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Edge use cases and things like that, backlogs of known issues, all that stuff is now highly urgent because it's exploitable with AI. So
Yeah.
customization at scale is what AI really thrives on. And I think the better the capabilities of Mythos and some of these other capabilities out there and other models out there, the more likely it is that the pathway at which enterprises are exploitable are becoming more and more visible. So on that notion, I think like some of the big trends that we're seeing across our companies is really in the context of understanding what we can do on the other side to combat that. And traditionally, if you think about cybersecurity as an industry, we have been a sequential. Every product approach has been sequential, meaning you see what an adversary does, you observe it, you alert it, and then you investigate, and then you try to figure out exactly what happened, and then you try to remediate. It's always been the sequential approach of how we actually have solved problems in the industry. And I think that could really change. A lot of our companies are working on the concept of having it be simulated, like living in a world that is simulated so that you can see what happens in the world before it happens, right?
Yeah,
To you. Companies like Sandera who do this really in the context of agentic security, who can actually simulate exactly what malicious behavior might look like from an agent, or even Nebulock, which is an agentic threat hunting platform that really is able to take findings in a way that a enterprise has never really seen before, really the unknowns of unknowns. And that to me is like the evolution that we're going into, is to really understand things that we have not really seen before. Can we simulate them in an environment before it actually exists, and then actually able to remediate before it happens?
yeah.
So to me, I think founders who are exploiting that, whichever vertical that you might go after, that is a really compelling product concept that we're trying to hunt down.
It's always really good to get that insight. And I think there's nobody other than maybe CISOs who are also sat there having sleepless nights being like, why is nobody solving this problem? I think investors get this really fresh perspective of, okay, this is where we're just not seeing people come forward with the technologies that arguably we want to get behind. With that in mind, though, I do want to pivot the conversation a little bit because I think it's always worthwhile taking advantage of having somebody such as yourself on the podcast because there's so many founders that tune in here and there's so many founders, obviously, that are maybe first time founders. There's maybe people out there that have this great product in the back of their mind, or they're starting to work on something, but it's a case of, okay, I'm not ready to go for funding yet, or whatever it may be. And there's always that conversation. I think there's two arms that we should take this in. The first one being, what do you look for when it comes to investment? Because I think product market fit is obviously important. You want to invest in something that there's a demand for. But that's, of course, not the only thing that you're looking for when you're going into partnership with people, because there's obviously other factors that are going to determine whether there's going to be a success there. What's the blueprint, or is there a blueprint that you identify when people are coming to you and saying, Dan, I want a few million in this kind of products we've got going on here? How do they go about getting it?
Yeah, I think that if you asked me this question when I first started venture capital, especially on the early stage side, I'd always look for clarity of vision.
Yeah.
I'd always look for people who could really paint a compelling picture of what the world might look like years from now. I think that perspective has largely changed in my mind. I'm looking more for adaptability now and rate of learning and rate of execution. Primarily because the world, as you say yourself, is changing so rapidly now that those two things are actually more important than understanding where the world's going, because the world's changing every 2 weeks, right? Every model release is effectively a new iteration of what the world might look like. Some of the most advanced AI teams that we're seeing, not just in cybersecurity, but really broadly speaking in the portfolio and in companies that really I admire, is that people are willing to move incredibly fast, iterate on their product incredibly fast, and they really pride themselves on being able to ship product absolute rapid scale and a rapid rate. And that is really, I think, the big change that we're seeing now is like, how fast can you adapt, and how well can you recruit the talent to actually build that, call it as a software factory that can ship these products really quickly for you to stay ahead of where the world is going. I think, of course, having a unique perspective is important. Of course, being a talent magnet to like really attract the best people in the world to work with you is incredibly important. But for me right now, it's the rate of learning and the rate of execution of these teams that really makes a huge difference across the board.
Awesome. It's always really great to get that insight. And I think, especially like I mentioned, people can often think, oh, I've got the best product. Of course, people are going to want to invest in me. And they don't always realize that there's just so much more that goes into it. You can have the best product, but a lot of the time, it's having the right team, the right attitude, because it's a noisy industry. There's probably other people that also have a great product. So, how do you stand out from that? The other question that I want to touch base on there as well, though, Dan, is I think one thing that people always have in the back of their mind is, am I ready? Am I ready to start having those conversations with investors? Because I think some people think that before they start having conversations, they have to have everything lined up. They've got to have all their eggs in the right baskets. They've got to have kind of everything so that they can look as visually prepared as possible. But I know that this can vary because some people are like, hey, if the idea is still on the whiteboard, but it's a great idea, I want to be hearing about it. And some people want to see certain things before they come and get approached. Just from your perspective, what's your advice there? Is there a certain point where you say to people, this is when you should start having these conversations?
Yeah, look, I think this is why the industry is maybe, or the venture industry is maybe a little split. There's like clearly the kind of product market fit type firms, and there's the pre-product market fit type firms, and we are certainly the latter. So there's no such thing as like coming to us and talking to us as early as humanly possible. We have worked with teams while they were still working on other ideas or were still employed at other firms and just exploring ideas just conceptually and then eventually spinning out and building the product and building the company. For us, generally speaking, we don't have a limitation on is it too early. I think it's less related to what the VC thinks and more like what the founder thinks in terms of the convictions that they have. I think one thing that you should always do if you're a founder yourself is to really figure out how much conviction do you have behind this idea because you're going to dedicate your life to it, right? You're going to dedicate your family's life to it, right? So I think it's more important that you as a founder build the conviction needed in order to actually execute on the idea. And that comes through a variety of different things, right? Instead of saying, hey, I'm ready to talk to VC, ask yourself the question like, are you ready to talk to a customer?
Yeah.
Right? Like that conviction is much more important than the conviction of a VC. The closer you are to the customer, the more conviction that you can build through having these conversations with actual practitioners. That is arguably more important than saying, "Hey, am I ready to talk to a VC?"
I think there is sometimes a split within the VC world, and I think it's also really important that people can realize that there's so much knowledge that comes out of the venture capital space, and there's certain VCs, obviously, clearly, such as Decibel, that are like, "We're here to help. Come to us and come with your ideas." But I love what you mentioned at the end there around just really highlighting. I think people really underestimate how hard it is to be a founder. Yeah, you can have a great idea, but the execution pieces, it's consuming. It's a big old task, and you've really got to be ready for the commitment that it is because there's no easy way to have a successful business. People can talk about, oh, they got lucky they had a product, and it's no, you don't know what went into all of that. They just made it look like it was luck. It's never the case. Would you have, is there kind of one key piece of advice that you always, outside of all the stuff that we've said there, like a go-to bit of advice that you would always say to early stage founders in particular, especially maybe like those first time founders that are going through this journey for the first time, that you always think is this is just something there's a little bit of a golden nugget of knowledge that you always think every founder should know?
There's probably many things, but one thing I would always think through if you're a first time founder or if you're really thinking about starting a company, ask yourself the question of not just if you can get funding for it, but more so if this is a venture scale business.
Yeah.
Yeah, venture capital is highly leveraged capital against the equity of a company. In a way, it is expensive to give up most of the upside of the equity itself to a venture capital firm. And so really you have to think about the capital that you're getting in the context of like, how do we make this into a really large scale company? It's
Mhm.
great to build a widget. It's great to build something that maybe somebody will acquire for one day, $100 million, $200 million, which is material money in anybody's life. But I think the real question that you have to ask as a founder is like, is what I'm trying to do here a venture scale outcome? Because if it isn't, then maybe we should not raise venture capital dollars. Maybe it's better to bootstrap the company or find alternative ways of capital to build the company. So it's more important to really understand that if you get on the road of raising venture capital dollars, that you build a venture scale business. I think that sometimes is lost in the world of first time founders because they're really excited about the technology as they should be. But sometimes that's, I mean, maybe is that big enough? Is that big enough to support a venture scale outcome? I'll tell you a secret, which is most venture capitalists are actually terrible at estimating the actual TAM of a business, especially if it's emerging. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like the trend is so large and so fast that these market spaces get massive and you build a fantastic, really great business. But even as you start out, as you're like a first time founder, that's one of the core questions. Like, is what I'm trying to do here like a venture scale business? And if the
Yeah.
answer is yes, come talk to us.
Give Dan a call immediately. Dan, I think that's phenomenal advice because ultimately, especially in cyber, there seems to be this notion of it's like sometimes the funding becomes a bit of a flex game. It's who's got the biggest and the best round and who's got the evaluation that goes with it. And it is all that's great and it's newsworthy. And I think that's why we see so much of it. But like you mentioned there, success doesn't always have to go on that path in this kind of industry. There's all sorts of different ways that you can build a company in a really successful way. These are just the hyperscalers of the guys that are going to do that. And also, if you're going to go down that route, there's nothing, you don't want to go down that route and then realize halfway on that journey that, "Oh, actually, we weren't, this is maybe not the way we wanted to go," because you can't turn back time. And it's a commitment that you've made by that point. And scaling at that level is, again, circling back to, it's no easy feat. It's more than just building a great product, it's really building a business. And it's a completely different type of mindset that you've got to have. This has been a fantastic episode. Great to unpack everything from the conference and what you guys were doing there, but also getting some of that insights into you guys. Before we close out, one thing I just want to ask is, if anybody's been tuning in today, if there's been any founders or any kind of individuals that are maybe like, I've got a really great product, I'm thinking of building something here, but I just don't necessarily know where to get started, and then maybe worthwhile reaching out. How do people go around getting connected with individuals such as yourself?
Yeah, I'm perpetually online, but I'm available online. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on X. Apologies. Really, on any of these platforms, Signal, whatever. So we're quite reachable. You'll see us at every major cybersecurity conference out there. If you missed us at RSA, I'm sure we'll see each other at Black Hat.
Perfect. And it's always worthwhile asking, because I know a lot of the time people want to know how to get connected in and probably unpack a little bit more of what we said. But like I say, Dan, this has been great. So the final thing I just want to ask here is just to get a little bit of insight in. We've got an exciting few months ahead of us in the industry now that the I always feel like RSA is the proper conference kickoff. This is where now everything starts happening, and we've got a very exciting run all the way through to Black Hat, not overlooking all the fantastic conferences that happen outside of that circle. But I think this is really where we see some momentum in the industry and a lot of announcements coming out. What are you most excited about personally? Is there anything that you've really got your ear to the ground for? Is there anything that's coming up that you just think, or that's recently happened, and you just think, this is something I'm stoked about? And just what's going to be a highlight of 2026? Host Cyber Conversations, host Cyber Conversations 6.
I am always incredibly excited around these big conferences around the product releases of the portfolio. I won't steal their thunder, but I think like across the board, I've seen the feature velocity of all these companies pick up quite rapidly, which really just means that there'll be more and more releases coming out. And I hope all of these are game changing, or I anticipate that all of these will be game changing new product features across the board. So I am personally a little bit of a nerd about the features that our companies put out. And of course, I'm notoriously biased. Those are the best products in market.
The
Um,
only ones people should be buying.
yeah, there's really nothing else to say except for that. But yeah, I'm really excited for that. Similar to what we've done at RSA, we will try to host a series of events at Black Hat as well. If you're in Las Vegas in August, please stop by and come hang out with us, and we'd love to see you there.
I recommend people do it. And of course, you want to get in the aircon because let's be honest, absolutely nobody wants to be walking that strip in August in Vegas. It's roasting. Yeah, you can't tell in this episode because my hair's up, but normally for anyone that tunes in will know the hair gets wild at Vegas. It's, yeah, you want to get out the desert, get to Decibel's events for sure. No, Dan, this has been fantastic. It's been great to pick your brains. Thank you for being so candid and sharing your insights. And of course, giving us a bit of an insight to the festival that you put on while at RSA. And of course, thank you for joining me. And to everybody tuning in, as you've probably seen, Dan's always keen to get connected and chat. So make sure to reach out to him, reach out to the team. And of course, if you're along at Black Hat or any of the other conferences, pop your head into some of their fantastic events. But that is it for today. As much as we could probably keep going on forever, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, share this episode with your peers, anybody you think may find this useful. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you all next time for more conversations that are